Good morning. My name is Brad Cornell. I am the COO with the Olathe Chamber of Commerce. We want to welcome everybody to our Friday Zoom meeting. We hope everyone is staying safe and continues to be well. The Olathe Chamber of Commerce is committed to providing timely, relevant information. Today, our focus is on re-entering the workplace. At this point, I'd like to turn this over to Susie Carson with our chamber to provide introductions. Susie?
Yes, good morning. Thank you, Brad. Before we introduce our speakers this morning, I just want to run over a few housekeeping rules. We do have all attendees muted this morning just to cut down on the background noise. That, of course, does not mean that we do not want to hear your questions. So there is a Q&A tool down at the bottom of your screen. If you have any questions throughout today's presentation, we encourage you to write in there, and the panelists will see that and either answer your question during the presentation, or we will try to answer the question after the presentations. Also, all materials that you see today will be posted on our website after the webinar. You can visit them at www.olathe.org, so please be on the lookout for those today. So to introduce our first speaker is Dr. Agustina Boehringer. Dr. Agustina has been practicing clinically in the field of emergency medicine and urgent care since 2003. She was medically educated at the School of Medicine of the University of Buenos Aires, as well as Northeastern University. She received her doctorate in global health and disaster medicine from the University of Lynchburg. In addition to her clinical and administrative work, she is on faculty at the Tufts University School of Medicine and Northeastern University Booth College of Health Sciences. Dr. Boehringer resides primarily in Boston. However, she is currently in Kansas City serving as Associate Chief Medical Officer for Heart to Heart International, which is the health-focused nonprofit organization during the COVID-19 response. Dr. Agustina is married, has 2 grown sons, one of whom is in college. The other one is serving in the United States Navy. She and her husband are involved in dog rescue organizations, enjoy traveling, boating, and scuba diving. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Agustina. Both of our speakers are experts in their field that have agreed to share their knowledge during this time. So we hope you guys learned something. Thank you so much. Now we're going to switch over to Dr. Agustina. We're going to stop sharing our slides, actually, and then Dr. Agustina is going to jump on and share hers. So we're going to get started. David, thank you. Dr. Agustina, as you know, Dr. Agustina Boehringer is from Heart to Heart International. So we're excited she was able to join us as well. That voice thing's contagious. I apologize, but she's going to join us as well. So we're going to pass it over to Dr. Agustina.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm having a mild technical difficulty. Let me put my slides back up there for a moment. Thank you so much for having me this morning. And David, thank you so much for your presentation. It touches on a lot of these safety things that we want to discuss as you reopen your businesses and do so in hopefully a safe manner. I do want to very briefly go over what this virus is. So the novel coronavirus is a new virus from a family of viruses called the coronaviruses, which we have known for a long time and which can cause all manner of respiratory illnesses, anything from the common cold to very severe respiratory syndromes such as SARS and MERS. Although the family of viruses is known to us, this particular strain of it was previously not detected in humans up until the end of 2019, when a crop of unusual and similar-looking pneumonias were noted by public health officials in Wuhan, in China, and that is what led to the discovery that this pathogen was emerging. It appears to have originated in animals, and as many coronaviruses do, and then it jumped to humans. It is, as I mentioned, a respiratory virus, which means that it lives in the lining of your respiratory system, so your nasal passages, your throat, your mouth, your lungs, your windpipe, and so forth. Because that's where it lives, that's also how it transmits. It transmits in the droplets of saliva, mucus, and sputum that are created when, well, it lives always in there, but it comes out of your body in those droplets when you cough, sneeze, speak, even breathe. So that is a brief explanation of what the virus is and how it goes from one person to another. It's important to understand that because that allows us to then focus our risk mitigation strategies to prevent that transmission. We talk about IPC, which means infection prevention and control. And what that means is using a variety of strategies, as David referred to with that pyramid that he was showing you, to break that chain of transmission. Several things need to happen for one person to transmit any sort of infection to the next. And these are the chains in that link. The links in that chain that we talk about. So we talk about the disease transmission chain. The good news is that any of those links being broken results in a disruption of the entire chain. So there are things that are within our individual controls and within your control as a business owner or manager to try to prevent or at least slow down that transmission as things start to reopen. Very briefly, we're here at the top of the chain is the pathogen, which in this case is the coronavirus. Certainly in other infections, it could be bacteria or fungi or parasites or whatnot. The next link is the reservoir. Where does that infectious organism live? And in this case, as I refer to, it is in those in our respiratory system and in the mucus and sputum and saliva. The portal of exit is an important link because, of course, if I had this infection in my respiratory system, but it never came out of my body, then it couldn't go to another person and we wouldn't have a pandemic. I'm going to address the bottom three links in a little bit more detail in just a moment, but I just want to complete the chain here. The mode of transmission refers to once that infection is out of my body, how does it get to your body or somebody else's body? And then the portal of entry means how does it enter into your body? And then the last link is a susceptible host, meaning we don't always know why some people who are exposed to the virus may contract it while others may not. So the bottom three links, the portal of exit, mode of transmission, and portal of entry, are the things that are within our control as individuals and as business owners and managers. How do we control a portal of exit or break that link in order to disrupt this chain? Well, we do that by covering our portals of exit. And in this case, the way that the exit routes for your respiratory system are your nose and your mouth. So when you cough or sneeze, it is important to cover that so that you're not expelling those droplets in such a widespread manner. The mode of transmission link can be broken or at least disrupted in some way by being aware that if we minimize the spread of those infected droplets and also minimize any contact with those droplets, so it's not just a direct transmission, it also can be that those droplets sort of fall out of the air and contaminate surfaces. So cleaning surfaces, covering that cough and sneeze, and then very importantly, washing hands, which may have come in contact with that contamination and transmitting it further. So that is how we address that particular link. And then the portal of entry, which is also within our control, is going back to, it's similar to the portal of exit because the entry to your respiratory system is the same as the exit. It is your mouth and nose primarily. We do have some emerging evidence that maybe the eyes may be part of it, but we don't know that for sure, but definitely the nose and the mouth. So being careful with touching your face, your mouth, your nose, and covering those areas is also how we control that portal of entry link. And again, the good news, if you want to call it that, is that disrupting any one of these links will break the chain. The top 3 links are left for scientists to address, how to get rid of the virus, how to make people less susceptible, perhaps through vaccination or whatnot. So those are outside of our individual reach. But the bottom 3 are very important. And like I said, no one link is more important than the next. So it's important to do whatever we can to try to break that chain. What we are going to discuss about the breaking of those links are hand hygiene, as I alluded to, respiratory hygiene, or also known as respiratory etiquette, personal protective equipment, such as masks, certainly safe handling, cleaning and disinfection of any surfaces and environment. This is a big component of reopening safely, and David did a great job explaining about certain cleaning products and whatnot. So the OSHA website is a great source for that. And then waste management, because you are disinfecting areas or using some level of PPE, whether masks or gloves or whatnot, and so those are contaminated and need to be disposed of safely. We're briefly going to talk about hand hygiene. I do want to flag that Heart to Heart International has put together a very in-depth, very good presentation. It takes about an hour and a half, so obviously we won't go into that right now, but it is available. And the last slide in my presentation has the information on how to try to schedule that. And what our team does is we do a little intro call with you, and so we tailor the presentation to your particular business and setting so that we can give more in-depth recommendations that are more applicable. These are just very broad recommendations that apply to everyone, both at work and also at home and in the community. So the reason why I like this slide is because we all think we learned how to wash our hands in preschool, but the majority of people wash their hands ineffectively. So this slide very, very visually shows you how even with hand washing, sort of the normal pre-COVID hand washing that everybody thought they were doing right, there are areas of the hand that are vastly missed by normal hand washing techniques. So washing your hands is key, but if you wash your hands but you don't wash your hands effectively, then that is obviously not what we're looking for. So it's not just washing hands, it's washing hands properly. In some businesses, in some environments, gloves would be worn. We do recommend that those be worn only if it's absolutely necessary, and if you really know how to wear gloves, because otherwise they actually can increase contamination. And they tend to also give people the impression that if they're wearing gloves, they don't need to wash their hands. So it's important to know that hand hygiene and gloves are not exclusive of each other. And in fact, hand hygiene must be performed before and after putting on gloves, and gloves should be changed from task to task and from contact to contact. So in some business areas, it may be appropriate to wear them, such as certainly food, but in a lot of day-to-day errand type running, it actually ends up being a little bit of a double-edged sword. When we talk about respiratory hygiene or etiquette, it refers to that link that we were talking about, breaking the link of the mode of exit of this virus. So when we cough or sneeze, those droplets or little bits of saliva and mucus travel a fair distance. You probably have heard the 6-foot number. That is the number that we recommend for social distancing. And that number comes from the average length that a cough or sneeze can propel droplets, or the average distance, I should say. Having said that, please don't forget that that is an estimate and an average. So it's not an end-all be-all of absolute protection. Some people certainly can cough or sneeze 6 feet 2 inches. So 6 feet is the minimum distance that we recommend that you keep between your employees or your customers whenever possible. So when you cough or sneeze, like I said, that is a high way that this virus gets transmitted. So it's important to cover your cough. The ideal way to do it is with a tissue, with a clean tissue. And you would cover both your nose and your mouth whenever you cough or sneeze. Whether you're coughing and sneezing from COVID or not doesn't really matter. It's just anytime you cough or sneeze, whether it be from seasonal allergies or something is stuck in your throat or whatnot, just go ahead and cover it with that clean tissue. If you don't have a tissue, use the crook of your elbow or your upper sleeve area, because that is a part of your body that doesn't tend to touch a whole lot of surfaces, as opposed to your bare hand, which then of course is contaminated. If you cover your cough with your hand, then your hand is contaminated and it spreads those germs a whole lot faster. If you did use a tissue, we're going to want you to throw it away right away. Don't do that thing that grandma taught us, to shove it into the sleeve of our sweater for reuse. You don't want to reuse a used tissue. You certainly don't want to use a reusable handkerchief. Just use a single-use tissue and dispose of it right away. And whether you use the tissue or your sleeve, please go ahead and wash your hands fully, thoroughly, and properly immediately after any type of coughing or sneezing again, regardless of the cause. So something that is important to discuss, David did a great job of explaining it. We hear a lot about PPE. PPE, of course, means personal protective equipment, and it refers to a whole slew of different types of equipment that can be worn for protection from infection. Now, there's PPE that is unrelated to infection, and nobody would know better than OSHA about that. Different jobs have different exposures to chemicals and dust and, all sorts of other things. But here we're talking about PPE specific to the prevention of transmission of infectious diseases. As David explained, it is very important to use what we call risk-appropriate PPE. Not everybody needs that N95 respirator. Not everybody needs to wear a gown or a face shield or a hair cover or booties, to cover their shoes and stuff like that. Cloth masks are what most of the community will wear in a low-risk situation, such as running errands or going into a business briefly, or some sort of social type of contact where that distancing that we were discussing earlier is difficult to maintain. So the cloth masks, you probably have heard a lot of debate out there. I'm just going to address the pros and cons of them from a purely scientific and medical point of view. I don't get involved in all the other reasons why people debate them. So the big pros are that, we talked about that portal of entry and portal of exit, and a mask adds a layer of protection to those. It's undeniable. It, keeps your cough close to you. It may protect from some of the circulating particles, depending on the mask. And most importantly, the CDC does recommend that people wear them out in public. It is a good visual reminder, if you think about it, that things are not as they normally are. This is not business as usual. If everybody is wearing a mask, it gives us that little, oh yeah, that's right, I should probably keep my distance. Just a little visual aid. And it decreases the stigma of wearing it. Of course, everything that more people do becomes less weird, quote unquote. So those are some pros. They offer some protection. they are a good visual reminder to enhance other forms of protecting ourselves, and they decrease the stigma of wearing it. But they're not without cons or without the sort of the underside of them. The main one is that people who go through life and have not, don't have a medical background or a background in an occupation where PPE is part of their normal life, which is true for the majority of the population, are not as familiar with how to wear it properly and safely. So the masks, if they are worn improperly, can actually increase the transmission risk of the virus. So some ways that you have to, or some things that you have to remember when you're wearing a mask, is that we are considering that mask to be contaminated. Certainly on the outside, because that is the whole point of why you're wearing it. But if you happen to be an asymptomatic carrier of COVID-19, then if you're coughing and sneezing into that cloth mask, then the inside of the mask is contaminated by you. So either way, if you're constantly touching your mask to adjust it, to fiddle with it, I wear glasses, so I find that cloth masks make my glasses fog up, which of course is very annoying. Anything that makes you touch your mask frequently is contaminating your hand and possibly other parts of your face. It may bring the virus closer to your portal of entry. And then when you take off that mask or when you use that contaminated hand in your normal life, you are contaminating surfaces. So it's very important to wear the mask properly, to not touch it when it's on. So make sure your mask is clean. You're going to put it, usually with those loops behind your ears, and you're only going to use those loops to take it off when it's time to take it off. When you take it off, you're not just going to put it in the same pocket where you keep your phone, for example. You're going to have a dedicated area for your contaminated mask until you can get home and wash it. So it's important to wear them properly. Again, it's like the hand washing. Do it, but do it well. The cloth masks can make people feel more protected than they really are. So they can let their guard down in other infection prevention and control areas, such as washing their hands or anything else that we do, like social distancing and whatnot. So it's important to not only rely on the mask. It's just another tool. It's not the perfect force field of impenetrable protection. The masks are difficult I can't tell you how effective a cloth mask is because there is no standardization in their fabrication. So, there's no tests that tell us this mask versus that mask is more protective as far as, again, the cloth masks go, because the fabric that people use, is it a t-shirt, is it a bandana, is it quilting fabric? It varies a lot. The shape, the size, how many layers of fabric. So it's difficult to say the masks are this % protective. So let's remember that when we wear them. They're certainly beneficial, but they are, again, not perfect. And then with all PPE, depleted supply is always a concern. With the cloth masks, maybe less so since they can be homemade. But the reason, again, going back to what David mentioned, the reason why we wear cloth masks for lower risk things is because, unfortunately, there aren't N95 respirators for every last person on earth. So I need an N95 respirator when I intubate a patient in the emergency room because that is a very high risk exposure. I'm extremely close to the patient. Those aerosols are being generated from the respiratory system. They're going right in my face. So I need that higher level of protection. But I don't wear my N95 when I go to Target because then that is not something I would need. So it's important to use that PPE according to risk. This slide was mostly covered by Dave, actually, when we talk about risk assessment. Each business, each occupation, each layout or setup of the particular conditions pose their own hazards. It's important for everybody to, as an organization, to go through those hazards and identify them to establish the level of inherent risk that your particular business presents. What that means is if I didn't do anything about anything, if I didn't change anything, would I be in that low risk category, that medium risk category, high or very high, as David referred to earlier? So once you know that, you can address control measures for each of those hazards to decrease your level of risk. What we call that is the residual level of risk, which is how high your risk is after you've addressed all your hazards. Ideally, obviously, that would be a lower number than your initial risk, but not always. Sometimes the level of inherent risk is so low that there's no significant change or no significant hazards that need to be addressed. As I mentioned before, when Heart to Heart does our in-length training for infection prevention and control, we do have a brief introductory call with you ahead of time so that we can talk through some particular hazards that perhaps are specific to your setup or organization. So if you are interested in scheduling that, Susie will make available this slide to you with both the Heart to Heart COVID training page, as well as the email address to schedule it or to ask more questions about it. It is covid19@hearttoheart.org. Our resources always come from the CDC and WHO recommendations. We give updated and evidence-based recommendations based on that. And then the beginning slide also has my personal email. So Susie, please feel free to make that available to the participants as well if any additional questions arise. So that concludes my presentation. I want to thank you all so much for your attention and also for your thoughtfulness and conscientiousness in trying to keep yourselves, your staff, and your customers safe as you go about reopening. So thank you very much and have a great rest of your day.
Perfect. Thank you so much, David and Dr. Agustina. I do have a few questions that we got in here. So real quick, we're just going to cover 2 or 3 questions. Are KN95 masks acceptable?
KN95s are considered, or at least purported to be, alternatives to N95s. And the problem is that they are not usually manufactured exactly in accordance to the specifications for N95. So you may have heard recently in the news that a lot of specific brands of KN95s were recalled or were found to not be as effective. So I would be careful with them. I'm not saying you shouldn't use them, but they may not always be equivalent to an N95, although they purport to be.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, our next question, Dr. Agustina. In order to make our employees feel comfortable, we want to continue offering services in our break room, coffee stations, or water coolers. What would you recommend to companies that have these areas?
So I appreciate, people wanting to be comfortable at work, but I think in times such as these, it is much more important to be safe at work. And so any place where people gather is not a safe place unless you can gather 6 feet apart, and those surfaces that are frequently touched by lots of different people are constantly disinfected. So I can't, of course, address to your particular setup, but I know in our office we are only allowing 1 person in the break room at a time. It gets cleaned immediately after. Anything that you can think of that I usually say, anything that a lot of people touch throughout the day or a few people touch a lot, if that makes sense. So, your coffee maker, certainly your water cooler, or as we call it in Boston, a bubbler or a bubbler, I guess as the case may be. The microwave, the handle to your refrigerator, even the doorknob to your break rooms, anything like those are going to be hotspots for infection. So between that and the fact that people tend to, I mean, I don't know about your break room, but I've never seen a break room where I could have 20 people 6 feet apart. That'd be a huge break room. They're tricky. I would recommend minimizing the use and trying to keep maybe to 1 to 2 people at a time there, and ensuring that everybody's compliant with proper cleaning and disinfecting of surfaces.
Perfect. Okay, the next question. We are a church looking for a good product to spray down our upholstered chairs in our auditorium. Do you have any recommendations for a product that isn't currently back ordered and is easily accessible for shipping or local delivery?
You could check the CDC website as well. The other day I was looking on it, and there were about 410 different approved cleaning products. You know, I certainly wouldn't know which one would be more safe for upholstery without ruining your furniture, but that would be a good place to start, and, you know, and then confirm it with the manufacturer, as David said, to make sure that it's not just killing COVID, but also hopefully not ruining your furniture.
Perfect. Thank you both. And I think the Chamber may be able to help you out with that as well. That concludes our presentation for today. Dr. Agustina Boehringer, thank you so much for your time today. We greatly appreciate you guys sharing your knowledge with us. And I'm going to pass it over. Thank you. I'm going to pass it over to Brad real quick from the Chamber.
Thank you, Susie, and thank you once again to our speakers for your time this morning and all of the great information presented. As was stated, resources used today will be available on our website under the Coronavirus Resources tab on our homepage. Also included at that area is a list of PPE materials that are available and the sources you can get those from. Thank you again for joining us today, and everybody have a great weekend. Thank you.